Good, very late evening, family. How you doing? I'm your brother by Radi. I was having a thought, and the ancestor suggested that I record this. Um, we have never tried researching or even considering the positives that were held within our communities pre-integration. As noted before, we have always seen, or maybe we have always been told to see, integration as a positive for our community. Yet the health outcomes for us as Black folks over the last 60 years suggest that integration to some extent is significantly more deadly to us than we might have previously conceived. Now, there might be European Americans, white folks, who find this assertion disturbing and may try to rebuke it, but the rebuke and their find may, well, will fall on deaf ears. We hear each year over and over and over again about the negative outcomes of Black America, the negative health outcomes for Black Americans. We well know, don't live as long as white people. We are now getting the data necessary over the last 10 years specifically that suggests it is because we are under specific types of stressors and pressurers that white people themselves don't have to deal with because, surprise, surprise, white people are the culprits and originators of both of those things. Now, that is obviously not to say that living in a segregated society didn't offer pressures and stressors that obviously would erode years off of our lives. That is, that would be a stupid remark. But what it does say is because we were forced to acknowledge these points of reality, that we may have developed structures and strategies to mitigate those pressurers and stressors, which might have helped us live longer. We are constantly told that because of racism, white supremacy, no matter what age in America you look at, Black people just died younger. But I believe that doesn't tell the whole story. Maybe overall, Black people died younger. But again, there are enough pictures, there are enough stories, there are enough family recalls that, recollection, that tell us of older Black people. And I'm talking significantly older Black people who lived, who prospered, and who were able to pass wisdom 2 generations prior to the current generation being alive, that was gathered back then. For this reason, I have to ask the question, and I think it's a right question to ask. Have we overlooked something powerful? What did our institutions do to mitigate the problems and stresses and trauma that the white community was pressing on us? Have we ever thought about that? But more, what type of cultural atmosphere was created by the fact that we had to depend on one another. Now, earlier tonight, I was commenting on a video that was published by one Lisa Cabrera. I like her channel. It was a video that was discussing the coming demographic realities for the world. And they mentioned that this demographic, reality was going to cause a major shift in the economic states in the world. Those who right now consider themselves the top of the economic pile would not, by century's end, be in that position. Though, I must admit, the report which she read absolutely downplayed how devastating the demographic shift would likely be for the United States by trying to assert that come the end of the century, the United States would be among many powers that would be contending for economic, or that would be exercising economic dominance in the world. Among them was India and Nigeria and possibly China. Now, the West has invested billions, possibly even trillions when you consider China part of the West. They have invested trillions of dollars into turning Nigeria into a black Anglo-Saxon outpost. The heartbeat in Africa that beats Anglo-Saxism throughout Africa. They've been doing that. That stated, in my comment to her, I pointed out the fact that I believe the report she read lied. Let me see. Maybe I can pull this up really quickly. Yes, I can. Here's what I wrote to her. There are several lies in that report you read. The first being, China has the largest, right now, the report said China would have the largest GDP in 2032. The first being, China has the largest GDP already. Economists expected that to happen during this past decade, but as the decade has passed, they have moved the year which they would accomplish the highest GDP in the world. The second being the dominance of India into the second half of this century. India, as currently structured, is considered an heretical dynasty who is linked to the Anglo-American administrative structure. Mythologically, they are connected to the first human tradition that pervaded Europe and America in the late 1800s into the mid-1900s. What I am talking about there, and I couldn't write this because YouTube algorithms would have grabbed and deleted the comment if I had put it. Yes, censorship, ladies and gentlemen. When I say that mythologically, India is connected to the first human tradition that pervaded Europe and America in the late 1800s and mid-1900s, I'm talking about the Aryanesque or the Aryan mythology that made the rounds in late 1800s through much of the beginning of the 1900s. This mythology should not be underestimated, family. I believe those in the metaphysical community, even those in the Afrocentric community, has done themselves huge disservices by not engaging in reading Aryanism myths. You learn a lot about who white people think they are by reading those myths, even if you don't think they're real. Moreover, as I keep telling people who I bring this up to, and it isn't many, black people are the true Aryans. We have to be. The idea of Aryans, let me just explain this, then I will. Well, I'll wait till after I read the rest of this. It's only a little bit more, and then I'll get into the idea of Aryanism. This is unlikely to happen. I'm talking again about India being in dominance into the second half of the century. This is unlikely to happen as Africa finds its power, since India doesn't really respect the Africans, a dynamic that will fray their relationship as Africa grows in stature. Parentheses. The caste system in India benefits the paler citizens at the expense of the darker citizens. Yet many of those darker citizens have self-image problems which they work out by abusing non-Indian black people. Close parentheses. This is also the case with China. Africa will likely be the dominant cultural force for the world by the century's midpoint, with Africans in this country leading the charge. This will give us immense political power, and I mean that. That's the whole reason why I'm doing this video right here. When it comes to the growth, the demographic shift in this world, the only saving grace that Europeans have, and they are setting this up presently, is their grasping of epigenetics. They are trying to, as the movie Get Out suggests, transplant their minds, their spiritual tendencies, their spiritual cognitions into the bodies of other people. Now, I'm not talking spiritually here, per se. When it comes to mankind, their only ability to try and move into the next era, their only tool, to try and move them into the next era, will be a sort of spiritual transhumanism where the mind gets on their wavelength. The mind gets on their wavelength, and as the body goes through the process of reproduction, the sperm and the egg are on that wavelength enough to allow the spirit of mankind to come in and to live in that body. As our genetic material is activated, which they're desperately trying to move away from here, and trying to sabotage with food and various other means, no matter where your mind is, the body won't be able to handle any mankind. But they are trying desperately to get us to that point. That stated, Aryanism. When it comes to Aryanism, we are, as black people, the true Aryans. Why? The concept of Aryanism is linked to the astrological sign Aries. And pardon me for seeming completely hopeless when it comes to this, but if I remember correctly, I didn't expect to talk about this with you. If I remember correctly, I think it's every 26,000 years the planet enters into a new astrological sign. Now, that's in the north. There are actually a number of, like, I guess several dozen, astrological signs in the southern hemisphere, which, because the Europeans couldn't see them, they didn't bother putting much time and effort into them. Think about that. I just found this out a couple of years ago. Or, excuse me, last year. I apologize. It was last year. There are, and I do believe they said between 2 and 3 dozen such, not, I apologize, I said astrological signs. It's not technically astrological signs, constellations, which exist in the southern hemisphere. But again, Europeans can't see them, so they didn't take time to map them or even to name them appropriately or care what the indigenous people in those regions called them and believed the powers that they contributed to the planet war. That stated, we, again, every 26,000, if I'm not mistaken, the planet enters into a new astrological sign. We are currently, I believe, in the age of Aquarius, I think. Well, if that's the case, we have gone through a lot of signs. What they are trying to prove by their Aryan mythology is that when that first sign was entered into in this latest cycle, when Aries was struck in this latest cycle, white people were the prototype man, woman on the planet. Their own science doesn't back that up. The prototype man and woman were us. Therefore, we are the true Aryans. We are the true Aryans. Now, the primary reason, again, why I'm doing this particular video is centered around the idea that Africa is going to rise in stature, and to read this point again, Africa will likely be the dominant cultural force for the world by the century's midpoint, with Africans in this country leading the charge. This will give us immense political power. I did not make that up. Our brother, who was literally run out of this country, our brother, Dr. Tommy Curry, is the person who first informed me through his lectures that this was a thing. Right before he was driven out of this country, ladies and gentlemen, I am not joking. He used to work for, I think it was the University of Texas. He drove them white people so crazy because he kept calling bull on the feminist intersectionality hogwash, and that's what it is. That they kept pushing to drive black women and black men apart. And not only did he call it hogwash, but he went into the archives and didn't only just come out with surface level arguments. He went so far into those archives and read so much that he was able to take whole schools of thought offered by specific authors and completely turn them on its head, arguing point by point and discovering subpoints that people didn't even know about and arguing them. He released a book right before he was driven out of this country. This is how dangerous this man is. Look up his work, Dr. Tommy Curry. He released a book, and I watched an interview about this man from him on I completely flummoxed his name, Josiah Royce. Now, this was a man who Dr. King studied and pulled his idea for the beloved community from. Well, Mr. Royce had a number of other concepts that were not too good and beneficial to black people. One such argument that he made, and Dr. Tommy Curry talked about this, was the importance of cultural dominance when it came to dominating people and dominating countries. If you could dominate the culture of a people, you could dominate the people. And so he advocated, and this is just a really simple way of looking at it. He advocated the creation of a unified cultural structure that could then be pushed onto other countries. This is not the first time I've heard this argument. There's a book that I have that I can't see from here, and I can't even remember what it is, so I can't really give you the title of it. But they talk about this in the book. They talk about this in the book. And if you look at the processes that were executed against Africans when they were being turned into Negroes and slaves, you see that the idea was to replace their Africanness, which we should never call that continent Africa. That was given to the continent by the Romans. I just learned that. I'm listening to this book called The Storm Before the Storm, and just realized, because he talks about it briefly, that the Romans had a colony in Africa, which they called Africa. They renamed Africa. Our great elder, Dr. Ben, gave us the right name. That's El Cabalan. Give me 1 second, family. I'm back, family. So the idea was to replace the Africanness, the El Cabalanianness, with the Negroness, the slaveness, the mentality of slavery. Now, the reason I want to point out here that the Romans called the continent Africa, I think his name was Scipio Africanus, or Scipio Africus, or something like that, is because the Roman Empire lives through the Catholic Church. And no matter what they're trying to do to reform themselves, and they're going to try to reform themselves, trust me, they have to. Cosmos is not happy with them right now. But the fact that we keep calling it Africa means we are literally creating an atmosphere for continuous colonization. Moreover, the word Africa may not mean exactly what we think it means. Remember, our Native American brothers and sisters, they said that the word America is 2 words in their language, and here's what they mean. Ame, the love of, Rika, money, or not money, riches. The love of riches. Well, what does Africa mean? Because Africa has Af and Rika. Now, if we look at Af like the Egyptians, looked at Af. One second. All right, family. So I'm back. So we're to look at Af like the Egyptians looked at Af. Then that's a god. That's a god. And though the sources don't write very much about the god, what we must understand is part of his duty, Af, was to be seen as the night sun god. Do you understand how powerful that is? To be seen as the night's sun god. So now we have the night's sun god, and then Rika, which European-wise is to mean riches. So the night sun god's riches. Intent is everything. Because we always have to remember, in the Book of the Dead, or the Book of Coming Forth by Day, Af was always seen as a dead god, limited god. And that was purposeful. Though, if he is seen as the night's sun god, he cannot be dead. Think about that when you think about Africa. Now, Dr. Ben, when he talked about El-Kabbalah, he talked about, and I'm going to have to pause this again because I got to go get a book. I'll be back. All right, family. So I thought that it was in this book, but it was not. Anyway, I'm going to show this book anyway. This is Black Christian Nationalism, which is interesting. If black folks had been on this for the last 40 years, we'd be in a different place right now. That stated, one of these books talks about Dr. Ben's assertion that El-Kabbalah, which is the appropriate name for the continent we know as Africa, essentially breaks down to mean something like the land of the Alkanoid beings, which I thought was very interesting since they are finding immense information now and confirmation that this in our skin is an alkaloid type of pigmentation. Now, names mean something. Names mean something. In the grand scheme of the spiritual impressions on this planet, names set the biorhythms for the entire place. I was going to say edifice, but I think that comes off as too separate. A name changes the vibratory frequency of a given place. This is why Europeans, unknown to them, they were not this wise. They did not understand this, I think, anyway. I don't know if the Moors shared this with them. But this is one of the primary reasons why they refused to let natives, indigenous people, Al-Kabbalah beings from Africa, why they refused to let them name things. Name was power. Thus, when we hear the word Hispanic, we think of people south of the Mexican border. But in fact, a Hispanic comes from Spain. What are they trying to communicate by giving those people in what is called South America and what is called Central America, the names Latin, Latino, or now Latinx, as if there's a difference, and Hispanic, are they not trying to supersede their original essences by imposing on them the mentality, the mindset, the eyesight, of those names? Names are important. Names are important. So I'll show you this last book. I've mentioned it before, and I would definitely encourage you to get this book. Marcus Garvey and the Vision of Africa, edited and with introduction and commentaries by John Hendrik Clark. So funny, I didn't realize that he was involved with this. That's the book, guys. That's the book. I've mentioned it before. It is not a small book. It isn't. It's over 400 pages. And he included a lot in here. I want to finish up by saying, take back your culture. Your culture is what's going to save the planet. Not your reasoning. Not your attempt to try to logically formulate arguments that mirror that of the Europeans. We are a rhythmic people. We are not supposed to be logical without emotionality. We are a rhythmic people. Now, there is a tendency, because we have been in a predicament where we could not appropriately honor and recognize our emotions. So there is a tendency to sometimes get out of ourselves and to act out our emotions in ways that are unhealthy. We must develop ways, as we had before, of channeling our rage, channeling our emotions, so that they become an asset to us. If it was up to me, every black child starting today would begin to learn 2 to 3 types of martial arts, one of which would be yoga. If it was up to me today, every black community would have a racist, a racist therapy group where we can go and we can deal with the consequences of racism and racists. If it was up to me, every person who chose to do it would learn how to use firearms and the importance of when to use firearms and why firearms could be necessary. If it was up to me, I would implement a Afrocentric schooling curriculum for everyone who wants it, including adults. Note, and I'll return back to the original point here, as we have tried to do more and more and more things like Europeans have done, look at the state of our communities. Have we not realized finally that the European has no clue what the heck they're doing? That their ultimate goals are not to build community and society, and particularly communities and societies that are long running. Their ultimate goal is control. And when I look at the patterns that are evident in what we call African tribes, Al-Kabalanian tribes, what we see is a pattern of unified control, of cooperation, of community unification that enables the individual, yes, to be sustainable in a way that benefits the community, but also gives to the individual a means of being who they are born to be. Now, clearly, because of tribal differences and the continental infighting that was occurring prior to the Europeans, something needed to evolve on the continent. And I think what we have seen over the last 600 years was a way, it wasn't supposed to be the way, for that something to evolve. What that something was a means of interconnecting all of the tribes and giving to the tribes a means of individualizing each person while keeping them still sacredly sound to the ancestral way of community. That was more important than anything. That was more important than anything. We, for this reason, have to remember that our sole motive for everything that we do is community and cooperation. The farther we get away from that, the more alien we feel, the more isolated we feel, the more lonely we are, and the more likely it is that we are going to do damage to ourselves, our families, and ultimately our community. White people are different. The book that I tell you guys about all the time about the cultural, by Janice E. Hale, Black Culture, It's Something in Roots. That book makes it very clear. They have a very cold and distant culture. The Celtics were different. The Celts, were different. But the Celts were fought almost until extinction and assimilation. But they were different, as are some of the indigenous groups that are still around in Europe. Our people are different than that. And by the way, this is so well known in the European community that you could watch a show like John Oliver's Last Week Tonight, and he makes references to this, about the coldness and distantness of European parents. It was such a problem that you had Dr. Spock back in the 60s writing books telling European parents to be more loving and empathetic towards their children. We are different than that. We are different than that. And the more we adhere to who we truthfully are and get away from this garbage of individualism, the more we adhere to who we are, the greater our community will be. This is why I started off by asking the question, are we missing lessons from our own communities? Because our communities had lessons. Finally, when we look at what individualism has done to Black folks, the whole concept of the B-boy, that would be the business boy, the D-boy, your advanced gangsterism, All of that comes out of the concept of us trying to be individualists and trying to copy the way that these people operate. Well, I'm going to make a statement like that which I made before. The mother is angry at them, and she's coming for them. Come out of her and do it quickly, because she is not playing. When she comes this time, she's kicking ass and taking names. She ain't asking questions. Too many of you are wearing the mark. Oh, did you hear what I just said? Too many of you are wearing the mark and don't even realize it. I'll give you an example. If you have ever given up your willpower to their God and not claimed it back, you got the mark. You got the mark. And I need y'all to understand that. If you've given up your willpower to them and you ain't claimed it back, you got the mark. Notice what's happening to some of these black churches with this COVID-19. Now look, I ain't getting cocky on it, because any one of us can get hit by this thing, and I mean it. That's how prepared the mother is to just devastate this entire planet. But pay attention. Pay attention. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, leave them below. I'm your brother Vladimir Dees. You know, it's funny, I was working out a little bit right before I got on here. And, man, wow. It's just wow. I didn't expect to do this, and I didn't expect this to take about 40 minutes either. Question, comments, concern, leave them below. Oh, yes, if you've made it this far, and I know not all of you do, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to this channel, but also like, share, and subscribe to my Mtima Radi channel. In the description for this channel, I put my Mtima Radi channel on there. So go over there and like it, share it, subscribe to it. Make sure you hit the bell. I don't always say this enough, but next year, Mtima Radi, that channel is about to be popping. I'm going to be putting things up there for free, but I'm also going to be putting things up there that are going to cost some money. And I'm doing that not because I want to take y'all money, but I really want to start doing this more regularly. And, you know, books like this, I mean, technically not this book. I like this book, but probably not this book. But I want to start actually having the time to read and to break these things down. And the only way that you do that is if you get a steady income. So I'm going to start doing that. I hope you guys can understand that. Questions, comments, concerns, leave them below. I'll see you on the next one. This is Mtima Radi, everybody. Peace.